Hello all. Is this working? Yeah, I think so. Well, it's an honor to be hosting or moderating this panel. We will be moderating here. If we want more radicalized debate, we can have it in the other side, in the other room. Here, I am honored to be here with Miguel Prados, who is an ethical finance expert by the Social Banking Institute and founding member of the Oxford Blockchain Foundation, with Susana Martín Belmonte, who is chief economist of the REC project. Is a very interesting social economy project that has been institutionally backed. With Pat Rawson here, the communications lead of the DAOstack project. He was our DAO guy here. And with Vincent van der Lubbe, who is the chair of the Sociocracy for All. And I will be looking forward his insights into this very interesting sociocracy governance concept, which probably many of you are not familiar with. So we are here to discuss about this I call it a sandbox concept, that is the DAO, which is organizations that live in the blockchain. As David has introduced, they have this autonomous, and linked to the traditional institutions. Right now, we have pretty obviously, there's a consensus that institutions are failing to deliver in many aspects of our lives, so to say. They seem to be slow to respond to the social challenges and seem to be, in many ways, not delivering the well-being that the society expects. In many aspects, traditionally, NGOs have tried to complement those so to say, those services or those benefits that traditional institutions, traditional governments were not delivering. But NGOs also have problems sometimes of transparency, sometimes of stagnating hierarchical structures, governance problems, sometimes. And in this outline of structures, the DAO may come as a possible refreshment, given its possibilities. I would like to ask our panel, first of all, what do they think of the DAOs as a possible improvement, or even, perhaps, as a way of forking the institutions? So what do you think? Let's start by Pat, for instance. Pat, what's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a number of benefits in having a DAO structure. And those benefits mostly have to do with transparency and accountability. And there were a couple of speakers before me that were discussing transparency. And the more transparency we have, the less likely governments are going to behave poorly. So when we have an organization on the blockchain, and an actually decentralized blockchain, not something that can be captured in the same way that an institution can be captured, we have insight into their finances, we have insight into their voting records, we have an insight into their behavior, which allows us to collectively sort of regulate them more effectively. So it's definitely an improvement in terms of corruption and understanding of how these institutions behave.
Yes. Miguel?
Well, technology doesn't solve everything, and we must all know that. I came from the political side and also for the economy of the common good, and I've been into social currencies for a long time. And I've seen blockchain. I work with various blockchain projects, so I know the technology. But technology is not the solution itself. So technology is a tool that can be used as bad as any other type of technology. So, for instance, yeah, it helps to decentralize. It helps to have more transparency. It helps to have accountability, but it doesn't govern itself. It has to have rules for government. And what I've seen so far, I'm sorry to say that, but what I'm seeing so far is all politics with new technology. So I think there are like two worlds that have to come together. And then I think the blockchain guys should know about governance first, and governance should know about blockchain as well. But either part working like they know how both world works, I don't think it's the solution. Let's talk like we're doing now, and let's come with the best of both worlds.
Susanna?
Yeah, thank you, Sergi. Thank you for having us here. I think this is very interesting, and I come from the world of complementary currency systems, and I think the technology is not really key right now in this field, because what we're seeing is that most people don't understand where our money comes from. Our money comes from the banks, who really are the ones who create the currency that we use, the everyday currency that we use. And this is something that most people don't know yet. We are now trying to break this monopoly of banks to create money. And this is, for me, the key issue. So when you think about a new technology that is going to solve this, the first thing that comes to my mind is we haven't really realized yet who creates the money. And we are going to have to change the information, because it's not the banks now, it's going to be Libra by Facebook, the one who creates the world currency now. So it doesn't really, a change of technology may be able to just miss completely the point of what's going on, really, which is we are dominated by institutions that create our money. The money that we create is ours. And we haven't really realized now yet what it is right now, how it is right now, and we're going to move, thanks to a new technology, to another way of domination. So I really am looking forward to see what the blockchain can do for us. And we actually, in the project that I am part of right now, the REC currency, which is real economic currency in English, or recurso económico ciudadano, or in Spanish, and both and Catalan. We were trying to, we have tried to implement the blockchain, and it wasn't for the stage that we are right now. It was for replication. So we'll see. We'll see if we really make it, can profit from it or not. And, but the point is that, in my view, there's so much understanding by people missing here that, well, I'm worried about putting all the emphasis in the technology, because it's right now not there, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. On the one hand side, you have the technological development. So there's a lot of, I think, excitement in the DAO space. There are a lot of talented people working on it. So in a way, it's kind of a collective intelligence, I think, as Miguel would be calling it. So working on this, being very excited. On the other hand side, it also created a currency, with Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. So there's also money involved. There's real money involved. It has real value. So there's actually a development community who can actually get rewarded, which you don't have in a normal NGO space. No, we're all volunteering, basically. So that doesn't really scale so well. It's very difficult. So, and it's also interesting for investors to have now blockchain, so they can actually use those funds. So Andreessen Horowitz wants to invest in that space, but they don't invest in open source. No, so having blockchain then with this decentralized autonomous organizations, which is actually in traditional organizations a big topic now. The inverted pyramids, everybody's talking about it. So I think it's coming from both sides, and I'm curious where we will meet and how it will develop. And yes, and also how can we make these different types of currencies work in this new environment where the old and the new meets with technology.
Yeah, I think it's, to wrap up this first round, I think it's very interesting to note one insight that Miguel said, that technology is not the problem. He said that we have underlying problems, but still this technology, so the underlying problem is how to run an organization properly, right? There's issues of governance, there's issues of what services, what is really the good, the common good, or the good for everyone. These underlying problems are there. But once you solve them, as Pat said, you have a very adequate regulation, a very accurate regulation that you can implement in the blockchain. Once you have solved the problem where you want to go, then the blockchain really gives you the ruling that is very appropriate. And of course, since we are expecting some benefits, some well-being from the institution or the organization, and we are paying it somehow, this quid pro quo, then we need the economy comes into play that Susanna has mentioned, right? So then there is eventually the power of creating a new institution, so to say, is the power of actually switching to a new currency, like the REC project is attempting. No? And I think everything orbits around the concept of governance. The concept of governance, of course, the concept of a philosophical idea of what do we want to get from the institutions, but also how do we run an organization so that it survives effectively with a horizontal or as horizontal as you want management. And I would like, especially to ask Vincent, because he's the chair of Sociocracy for All, a little bit that he introduces us the concept of sociocracy, how the sociocratic decision process takes place.
Actually, it's very simple, I think. So basically, it's the idea of being able to say no. No? So, because if you can't say no, that's not good. And I think we realize that every day in our organizations. I think, well, I mean, there's a political situation here now. We say we object, and then you don't feel heard. So you want to be heard, you want to be able to say no. And if you want to say no, it means what are criteria for saying no? And actually also, is that my domain? So am I allowed to say something about this? Or does it pertain to something else, but it's not my thing? No, so I can't tell Pat that he shouldn't go to the toilet. That's his thing, no? So I don't have, I can't say, no, you can't go. No, that doesn't make sense. But maybe if we want to work together, that makes a lot of sense. And it's very simple, but it forces you the moment you say that, and I guess if you have children, you know that, no? They have an age where they start saying no, 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 and they know they can do that. You have to be more creative in saying, how do we do it then if we cannot coerce you? So it's really about non-coercive ways of solving problems together.
Yeah, Miguel?
But there are some things that are not, that you can resolve really. If you ask people where to go on holidays, to the beach or to the mountains, you will create two groups. So there's no in there, but they're just different likes. So I'm more into the idea of let's use the technology, the part that is good for that, to create different communities that has their own rule of governance. So for instance, you don't need to be horizontal because you think that people that work more deserve more, so you have like weighting, or you simply want a hierarchical organization because you feel more comfortable, you just want to paint and that's all, and you don't care about who managed the money of the fundraising or whatever. So I think the technology is useful to decentralize, to make it more transparent, but it doesn't need to force you to one type of governance. I think it's good to put in code the rules of governance. But we can't agree never ever on who are those good rules, because it depends on every community. We have different political parties because of that.
Yeah, I think Pat has a good example of how they run their DAOstack governance.
So I want to talk about our particular architecture for a second. For one thing, we absolutely agree with you. You know, there's no one sort of catch-all governance structure that works for most people, and there shouldn't be. You know, people have a diversity of interests and aims and values, and you know, sociocracy. I like this example because we have the expert here. You know, this within the architecture would be implemented as a voting machine. It would be implemented as a scheme, so a logic, a smart contract logic that could be applied to an organization. And within our particular architecture, we have what's called a scheme registrar. And what the scheme registrar allows you to do is to basically apply this type of logic, change this type of governance logic, or you know, upgrade it. You know, maybe you have you want to change the parameters of a quorum and what have you. And that's actually very, very powerful, because now you not only have the governance of these organizations on an immutable database, that's what a blockchain is, right? But you have the power to upgrade them in a completely censorship-resistant manner based upon the needs of that organization over time.
But then you have a fork if they don't agree with the changes.
Well, you have a fork, but you can also have logic on how to structure a fork. You know, you could have a smart contract that says, you know, if 30% of the people disagree, you know, this is the minority protection here. Anytime they can trigger this particular logic, and they can move 30% of the assets of this organization into another organization automatically, and so there is a threshold for minority protection, and so it's just a matter of specifying, creating the specification for the governance logic that you want to have. And then, you know, going out, getting someone who's a lot smarter than me to build it, and then registering that to the organization to use.
But right now, Pat, there is a sort of a tokenized meritocracy, no, in a way, or reputation-based governance inside DAOstack, right?
Within DAOstack, so it's important to distinguish DAOstack the company versus DAOstack the project versus you know, like DAOstack the technology. You know, the company is one thing. We operate as a company. We are a company that is developing the DAOstack open source software. But the software itself, it's open source. Anyone can come build on it. There are 3 developer teams that actually do that. And they are building a variety of these sorts of templates so that different organizations can use them and experiment with them. And I want to paint a clear picture of where we're at in the industry, because people are saying blockchain doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. The primitives that we need to make this work didn't exist 18 months ago. You know, it took years for the cell phone to get adopted. It took years for the internet to get adopted. We're in 1995 right now. We're going into 1996, and we're still figuring things out. So it makes a lot of sense why things are not working. We have a very small handful of governance structures available for people to experiment with, and those structures are not optimal for 99% of use cases.
Yeah, I think that by what I have been seeing in the industry of the blockchain, it is for governance. It is key to know if your community can be liquid or is the one it is. What I mean is, if you can just say, I'm going to do things this way, and this is my protocol, my consensus, or we're doing, you know, I'm going this direction, and people can just join you or make a fork or leave you, then I think you have a pretty good case for this kind of decentralized autonomous organization. But when the community is not liquid, when it is the people that it is, like, for instance, the community in my building, we are all owners of a flat in this building. This is not the case. I mean, we are the community, we all are here, and we all are going to stay here. And we are the ones who have to reach agreements. In this situation, maybe a cooperative is much more of a structure for consensus than a DAO for now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But in that case, you will have hierarchy, because you have vote delegation, which is liquid democracy, so you will have one neighbor with the voting of 5 of 6 neighbors who will take effectively the decision for the rest. So it's
or not.
an effective oligarchy.
Or not.
Yeah, the good thing is that the technology is there to help, to configure it. And I think the point of increasing whatever the governance structure is, but increasing the collective intelligence of the group in taking decision is the way to go. So whatever the governance is, if that governance increases the collective intelligence of the group, let's go for that.
Yeah.
Well, I understand your take on liquid community a little bit related to the right to self-determination, actually, which is a current topic. Of course, if we are enclosed in a community and forced to live there, then the governance problem becomes different. And I also very much the concept of minority protection that Pat brought up. This is something we don't have in democracy now. And this is one of the minorities we are having problems all over the world handling the problem of minorities. And this is why I think these alternatives that maybe we have discussed here very briefly, because sadly the panel cannot last much longer, But we have introduced, hopefully, a couple of ideas into the possibilities of governance that can be implemented and how they could be implemented using a DAO structure and using the blockchain as a substrate, as a sandbox, to implement these other possibilities, these new communities, liquid communities, communities with minority protection, including perhaps sociocratic or holacratic or other sort of governance structures. So I thank the panel for their contributions, and the panel is open for questions if anyone is keen on asking. Okay. Nobody? Ah, we have a question. Do we have a microphone around?
Should wrap it up now.
Hey guys. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how DAOs can be used to kind of create new forms of governments, not necessarily augment them, but create entirely new governance forms like direct democracies or meritocracies or things like that.
Well, does anyone want to take this one?
I don't mind to take on that. You mean in forking a country?
I mean, yeah, I guess in theory, like if a country were to adopt a new form of government that is a DAO, where every citizen is a member or something.
When you talk about government, you talk about the ability to get people's taxes. And before that, you always came up to the brute force that at some point says, no, the people who are taking the taxes from these citizens are us. So at some point you will reach that. So you can't fork a government unless it's by overflowing it or by force. I think that's the thing. Other thing is that you can create different communities within outside geographic boundaries. For instance, you have big nation where you can choose the form of government. But to fork actually an actual government, I think that Pat have a say on that, and I think it's a good way to go.
I think it's very, very important to contextualize when you say government, because government does a lot of things. You know, government could mean the European Central Bank and the management of the euro in relation to this supranational currency union. But government can also mean, you know, your local municipality trash pickup. And for me, when we imagine a DAO structure, it's very, very important to contextualize the objective. So if we say we're going to create a DAO and we're going to create a DAO to be a substitute for trash pickup, we're going to take the money that is distributed to trash collectors by this municipality, and we're going to you know, say that this DAO will represent the neighborhood, and we're going to make that money available for them, you know, with the understanding that they will self-organize and pick up the trash. You know, that's an inversion of the power structures there from a centralized sort of dictatorial decision-making to a bottom-up responsibility and management thereof. But it's not going to be successful unless you have that very, very narrow contextualization on the DAO's priorities, the DAO's mission, the DAO's budget, and what have you.
Well, my take on that is a little bit more, I go a little bit further. I am a believer that DAO can replace a lot of the functions of a government, but it is true. I mean, Miguel makes a point. He says about the military force that government is able to enforce its frameworks to a point that a DAO probably will never be able to. In a DAO there could be fines, there could be you could maybe disciplinary. Tokenize disciplinary actions, or even you could kick out a member of the community. But other from that, if there are really, if you need to do harder things that are harder to do from the people, or you need to demand more from the people for some security reason, whatever, that it could not reach the level of a government in that. But probably it can do a lot of other things, a lot of the services related to maybe pension system, maybe universal basic income, maybe education, maybe health. I think all those things, maybe they could be replaced by a DAO. That's my take on it.
Yes, I will take one more question.
Hello, thank you for this panel and for the previous talks. The technology to create a DAO is clearly quite new. I'm wondering in regulatory terms, if an organization would like to become a DAO, what regulation they should refer to, right? And if it's developed, if there's anything on the horizon, really in practical terms, if my organization wanted to become a DAO.
Well, this question is difficult. Maybe Pat from DAOstack is the one who's going to know more about if there's any regulation that we can talk about.
So when we look at the number of organizations who have gone through this process and have chosen to DAOify themselves per se, there's really only a handful. And last I counted, there's only 4 that are more than 50 active individuals. So it really is new territory. There are specific use cases where folks have opted for a more regulatory route, even worked together with lawmakers to create legal personalities that are optimized for these particular structures. The one that comes to mind is in Vermont. There was a freelance developer cooperative that decided to use DAOstack to become a DAO, and the Vermont legislator created what's called a BBLLC, a blockchain-based limited liability company. And for their articles of association, they actually point to DAOstack and say, this is our governance engine. So we are following these rules. There are other organizations, such as the DAOstack. It consists of 400 people worldwide, and it has no legal personality. And it's operating in kind of a very gray area. It's hard to understand what it means to have a trans-global organization with no principal jurisdiction. So enter at your own risk, I suppose. Here there be dragons.
There is a possibility that the legal form that mostly adapts to a DAO, it's the cooperative in this way. And eventually you could do also the European cooperative, which is it's much more interesting than a simple Spanish cooperative. Let's say the European cooperative is a space if you are going to include people from different countries, only in this case, then you probably have an interesting legal framework to work with as a DAO.
For instance, for the public services of your example, the garbage, you can make a public service cooperative, which is in the Andalusian framework. Sí. It's possible to do that. My question for you would be, how do you, when you have a fork in this kind of system, where does the budget go?
Again, it depends on the logic of the governance structure. There's a DAO out there that has a very interesting logic. It's called the Moloch DAO. And the way that it's set up is that after funds of the Moloch DAO are contributed, and the person who contributes receives shares in return, voting rights. And after a proposal is passed, any person may rage quit. They may sell their shares for the remainder of the value of what's in the DAO's common treasury. And that's sort of the ultimate fork protection. If you think about it, if you disagree with any decision this DAO takes, you can just take your money and leave. But not all DAOs will be structured like this. There are 90% of use cases that might not work like this, and it's just a matter of, again, looking at the specification of the logic that you'd like to have for the governance engine, and then making sure that it's part of that DAO's logic.
Everything goes around again into the governance engine. This is also a core mission and governance.
The rules and the rules to make the rules, as we like to call it.
Yeah, the rules to make the rules, yeah, that's it. So, anyone else? We have another question here.
Guys, this is the last question. Thank you.
The last one, okay.
Sorry, taking into account, Spain and everything that's happening, do we have any practical applications today of DAO technology within any autonomous community within Spain? Is this being looked at now?
Well, I have my company, but it's not legal. I mean, I have my company registered legally, which is Comunitaria, but then I have registered the community as well in Aragon, which is a decentralized organization. So the shares can be transferred without intervention of a third party, and the rules are set within the Aragon DAO structure. So yes, I wouldn't say illegally, but I would say legally, Aragon is a good example of a DAO working, and working quite fine.
I would say many DAOs have a worldwide nature, or very decentralized in the way, even geographically. It is true that you can associate a DAO to a same as a company, but in general, the way you take the most power out of a DAO probably is by living only in the blockchain and distributed all around the world with people with a similar interest or mission, and probably there's many DAOs we don't know about, because one of the things of the DAO is the transparency. It depends. You can code it. You can live in total transparency or in total opacity, but this is what makes it also so powerful. No? This sandbox concept where you can. But in my case in particular, right now, I cannot tell you, apart from this one in Spain, a DAO localized DAO that is operating as such. There are, but they are not in my mind now.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you all.